summer break. I hope you had a relaxing time and you could also enjoy it, at least a little bit. To our lecture of today, I think with the fast development in the field of AI, we have in parallel ongoing discussion about regulation and governance. And I think this is one of the hottest topics of today, at least in computer science and in the field of IT. And this was also addressed by the United Nations. It set up a high-level advisory board, which has just finished and published a final report on global governance, the issue of global governance, and it contains also a set of recommendations. And I'm therefore very pleased to welcome one of the prominent members of this panel, Dame Wendy Hall from the University of Southampton, and she will be introduced by our moderator of today, George Metakidis. Very short to our choreography, it's as usual. We have the talk for 30 minutes by Wendy, then we have 30 minutes Q&A, moderated by George, and at the end, this is also a digital humanism habit-already tradition, a piece of music which is proposed by Wendy. Thanks, Wendy, for that. Now let us welcome our moderator, George Metakidis. I think he does not need an introduction. He has been with us since the early beginning and moderated several times. George, I thank you for that, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannes, and welcome everybody. Today we have a most distinguished speaker to enlighten us about the latest United Nations report entitled Governing AI for Humanity, as well as to share, I'm sure of that, her own personal thoughts about future-related developments. This report comes at a time when where the transforming potential of AI is stunningly underlined by the awarding of recent Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry to trailblazers in machine learning and pioneers in AI-driven protein research. You will also recall in a digital humanism lecture another Nobelist, recent Nobelist, Daron Acemoglu, who spoke to us here and argued very forcibly that the need for AI governance to spread its benefits and to mitigate its harms is urgent and important. And the UN report is very much in that spirit. It starts with the need, I quote, for a holistic global AI governance aimed at harnessing the benefits and mitigating the AI risks. Before introducing the speaker, just one remark for the context in which this report comes. It does not come into a vacuum of, let's say, governance initiatives. Quite the contrary. It comes in a context unprecedented, I believe, in the history of technology, where there's all kinds of governance initiatives from right, left, and center in what the report itself calls a patchwork. There's the AI Act in the European Union is working now on producing a concrete code of practice, which will be published next April. In the United States, the Office of Management and Budget is trying to put teeth in Biden's executive order by issuing procurement regulations. The G7 just published an AI toolkit for use of AI in public services. So it's a bubbling scene into which this report comes. And it's time to introduce our today's speaker, who can tell us how all this patchwork can be weaved together into a coherent, harmonic whole. So today's speaker is Professor Dame Wendy Hall, who served as a member of the United Nations High-Level Advisory Board, which authored this report, having earlier co-chaired the United Kingdom's government's AI review, and having served as a member of the UK AI Council. So she had a lot of in-depth experience on these issues. In addition to becoming a Dame Commander of the British Empire, she has received so many additional honors and high positions, including the presidency of ACM, that it would take an inordinate amount of time to enumerate here, so I will not. I will just add that she has been a co-founder with Tim Berners-Lee and others of the Web Science Trust, which together with digital humanism, digital enlightenment, and the people-centered internet have recently formed the Humanity Internet Alliance. Dear Wendy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Hannes. Thank you. Lovely to see some old faces and meet some new people. Now I'm going to try and share. Make sure I get the right one. Deaf UN talk, that's it. Okay, share. I think that's it. Yeah?
Yeah, fine.
Good. Okay, so, oh, I've already gone on. Didn't mean to do that so straight away. Oh, come on. There, right. Okay, yeah. Thank you for inviting me to do this. We couldn't find a Tuesday night I could do it until December the 17th. And in fact, I couldn't do that one now, George. So I actually found that I could do this evening, which is your opening session. So we decided to go for it. I was meant to be on holiday this week, but I'm not going till tomorrow. So we actually found a date I could do, and it's a real pleasure to be here because I know this is a group that will appreciate what this report's about. I don't have any answers. I can't say how that patchwork quilt that George described all fits together. We've still got to work that one out. But this is the story of how we produced this report and what it said. So we were actually called together by the Secretary General. We were a high-level advisory body. We call ourselves the AI advisory body, but in UN terms, we're the high-level advisory body. Both work. And we reported to the Secretary General through the tech envoy and Amandeep Gill, who's I'm a huge admirer of now. He's amazing. He's such a gentleman and so diplomatic. But what Amandeep wants, Amandeep tends to get. He manages to find a way to do it. So against all the odds, he pulled this big group together with the support of the Secretary General, who he sees on a regular basis. And really the driver for the UN and for the Secretary General was that the General Assembly this year was talking about the sustainable development goals of the UN, and the Secretary General is worried that not much progress is being made, and he has this idea that AI is going to help him. Now, I'm not 100% sure about that, but because actually what the SDGs need are resources and money to make things happen. But I think that his reasoning might not be what I think is the right reasoning, but I think where he got to is an amazing result in that we produced this report that I think will drive a conversation about global governance of AI to the benefit of humanity. And I hope very much that he manages to be able to use AI to help the Sustainable Development Goals. So the timeline was very fast. They actually, we had 9 months, if that. They started to call, they meant to start it earlier, but with everything with the UN takes forever. Didn't realize just how hierarchical it is. The Secretariat had to get permission before, I don't know, 2 or 3 layers deep or above them before they could send any emails out. I mean, it's very, very bureaucratic because they have to be very careful about everything they do. So they called for experts, countries, and people could self-nominate, and countries were asked to nominate. And I didn't the UK nominated me. So I can't say I was the UK rep. I was there representing me, but I was the UK person on the board. There were other people that were based in London, but I was the person, it doesn't matter. But I was the person who was actually there and liaising with the UK government about what was going on. We had our first meeting exactly this week last year. I was on a cruise. I remember it distinctly, and then we were asked to produce a result, an interim report by the end of the year. And then a lot of consultation, and then the final report we were asked to produce by July to be launched or published for the Summit for the Future in September. Our report was not going directly to the General Assembly. It went in through what's called the Global Digital Compact. I'll come back to that. That process was pretty opaque to us. We were very self-contained. We would produce a report which would be delivered to the Secretary General in the summer, and then there were 2 months of munging of that report. They didn't change the report itself, but they didn't publish it. But it had to go through the digital. The people producing the digital compact had to decide what of our report would go forward. I'll come back to that. And the key thing for me was that this was. Many of the things that George mentioned, G7, there's OECD, there's the Global Partnership on AI, there's what have come out of the various summits. None of those covered the whole world. And in particular, all of those ignored China. And whilst we have this very schizophrenic relationship with China, we don't know whether they're friends or allies or something, friends or enemies or something in between. But for sure, they are doing amazing work in AI. And just as on the digital planet, we have to be just as conscious of everybody on it as we are with the physical planet and climate change. You can't imagine having a climate science conference without China, can you? So the same, I think, has to apply to AI. We have to be cognizant of what they're doing and have to try and meet somewhere in the middle. But, I mean, if you want to understand the geopolitics of AI, read my book on the geopolitics of the internet. And Kieran and I are just embarking on a new book, which will take that thesis forward into the world of AI, because the geopolitics is the same. The technology may be different, but actually it's no coincidence that it's the internet companies that are driving this new AI wave, because they have the compute power and they have the data, and they can access the whole of the internet. So apart from OpenAI, it's all coming from which is another, well, because they've got Microsoft's backing. So it's effectively the internet companies. Anyway, what excited me about this work when I was asked to do it, I knew it was going to be a lot of hard work, and it was. It really was. It was probably one of the hardest and most intense things I've done. And to anybody whose email I didn't answer last year, or to who I was very curt because I had too many emails to answer, I really was swamped with work from this. But the key thing for me was that I could work with people from China, and Yi Zheng, who's from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and myself. He's very well known. He's someone who manages to keep the Beijing government happy and also be out there in the world and talking a lot of sense about AI. He's a very well-known AI. He does brain-computer interface, effectively, neuroscience. A very well-known researcher in his own right. He's also a charming man, speaks perfect English, and he's a pleasure to work with. And we were co-chairs of the governance working group, which I thought was, a real honor to be asked to do that for the first part of the report. So just to show you that you can see this actually, it's better than on a screen in a lecture theatre. There were 39 members of this board, and so that you didn't, is it 198 countries at the UN? I can't remember. It's that order, 200. So we didn't represent every country. We represented every region of the world, and of course there were some countries that were very annoyed that they weren't represented here. But Amandeep Gill and his team did a fantastic job, I think, in really picking a very diverse group of people. It was 50-50 men and women. There was an awful lot, I can't remember what percentage, from the developing world. And so it wasn't dominated by the US or China, for that matter, of course, but or the US. There were other companies, although the companies were represented. And we had there was a lady, the first name there, who was from Russia, right? So you know, there was nobody from North Korea, nobody from Iran. But anyway, the co-chairs were two wonderful people. Carme Artigas, who was she was an MEP that helped drive through the EU AI Act. She's no longer, she's gone from government. She's on gardening leave before she goes and works for a big company, I think. And then the other co-chair was James Manaika. Many of you will know either one or both of these. He's senior vice president of Google Alphabet and leads the research team in California. So big job. And they were our co-chairs, and they worked much harder than we did, because they had to have all the communications with the Secretary General's team and everything, and they had to go and pitch to the United Nations, do all sorts of things. They really worked very hard on our behalf. And just, you know, I'm not going to go through the list. You can look at it. It's all online. But you can see the types of people that were on it. There were lawyers. It was not all tech and business. A lot of lawyers, a lot of people from the human rights, NGOs, people who as well as representing the company. So Rahaf was we had an anthropologist, for example. Who else did I want to point out? Philip Thygo is now the Kenya's ambassador to the United Nations. I think he was from Kenya, mainly from Mexico. And the two there, because their names begin with Z, Yizheng and Zhang Ligan. Or do you know how? Yes, it's Lingan Zhang. Anyway, they were our Chinese reps, and so Yizheng's the brain-inspired cognitive AI lab that I mentioned, and Lingan is a lawyer from Chinese University of Political Science Law. I learned an awful lot from her, and I'm still in touch with her about what China's doing in terms of AI regulation. So, and we have many of you will know Marecha Shaker, who was an MEP. She produced a baby as part of this this process as well. She gave birth. She was our author. She was our scribe at the beginning with Ian Brennan, and then she went off on a very short maternity leave. She's back now, but we missed her at some of the meetings. Then there's people like Sharad Sharma, who I know very well from India, who's one of the people behind the digital public infrastructure and the Aadhaar number in India. Anyway, I could go on and on about. Because you know what it's like, you really bond over a difficult piece of work. I had my hip operation actually in November last year, so I couldn't go to the meeting in New York, but we produced an interim report, which many of you will have read, in December, which was really just looking at the scope of what we were going to do and the questions we were going to answer. And we produced this set of governance functions saying this is what we're going to be looking at, and this is how we're viewing what we're doing. Please, you know, we're going to consult, so come and talk to us if you want to. And we ran all sorts of workshops and consultations. We met in the first meeting where I met everybody was a meeting in Geneva in March, where we went on a whistle-stop coach tour of all the UN, well, not all, but most of the UN agencies in Geneva, particularly the World Health Organization, the ITU, which of course does a lot already in tech and AI, that runs the AI for Good conference, you know, the human rights people, the IP people, the you know, just all the agencies that basically are already doing things with AI. So that was a very intense 2 days for someone who was still recovering from a hip operation, but I survived. We then started a period of intense consultation. So throughout April, we ran, some of you might have been involved in them. I put close to 30 there. It was 20 something deep dives, and Amandeep counted it all up. Is that a cup of tea? It's my husband with a cup of tea. This is a lot of people you know, but you don't know many of them. So
hello, a lot of people I know, except for the ones I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Don. So sorry about that. Thank you. Amandeep counted it all, or his team did, and we consulted with over 2,000 people in these deep dives, and it was really amazing. The UN, you know, when the UN asked people to do things, people criticise the UN. Of course, it is flawed, but it's the only thing we have at that level in the world. And people come. We had a deep dive, for example, on open versus closed source AI, and we had 60 people on that call with some of the, we had Gary Marcus and Jan LeCun and Joshua Bengio, and people really, were keen to help. Very, 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 a lot of effort went into this. I don't know how the Secretariat did it all. We met in May. Unfortunately, it clashed with the A for Good conference. You can't believe it. 2 UN things clashed the same week. We were in Singapore, finalised our recommendations. They'd invited us all to speak at the AI, or a lot of us to speak at the AI for Good conference in Geneva, but we couldn't do both. So we finalised our recommendations, and then we had in May in Singapore, and then we had another intense period of iterating the report. So we did we talk a lot, and then the Secretariat would work all night. They're very good at this at the UN. Produce something we could look at the next morning, and then we'd all iterate it. So we iterated, and we were iterating right up until the 6th of July. I know I sent in my last box. I think it was the one on open versus closed source AI. I had to do a side box on that. I did one on data trust too. I did quite a lot in that, and I think I sent it in on the 6th of July. So I don't think, if you read it word for word, you will find inconsistencies. You will find a bit of repetition. You will, because I don't know that anybody actually read it word for word for those sorts of things before it went to the Secretary General, but it went to the Secretary General on the 7th of July. And then basically, that was the end. Our mission is now finished. We had a mission until the end of July, basically, to do this work. So we're still together as an email group, and they're still asking us to be ambassadors, and we don't actually know how any of us may or may not be involved in what comes next. Anyway, this is, how much time have I had?
I'd say about 5 to 10 more minutes.
Okay, so I won't play you then. I couldn't put it into the slide because this is a video of the Secretary General introducing the report. It's all online. You can go and watch it. This is the launch pad that went up on 1 o'clock in the morning, New York time, on the 19th of September. It had been embargoed, and the summit was on the 22nd and 23rd of September. It had been embargoed until then. It had been translated into several languages, of course. And the real process was getting it into the digital compact. And there was a flurry of huge amount of press and media. I was interviewed at midnight. Was it midnight? Yeah, midnight, or it was a 4-hour, I can't remember now, in New York. For the Today program, and they did a pre-record with me. It was gone midnight in the UK, in New York, and they did a pre-record for me for the Today program. There was a huge flurry of media, quite fun. I like those sorts of things, but and then it was like, well, what's the world going to make of it? And I'll just say straight away, of course, people will say there's this missing, and you've over-egged that, and you haven't thought about that. I've only had one email that's really critical of it. And I won't tell you who that was from. It was a computer scientist. But mostly media, the governments I've talked to have welcomed it as the start of a conversation. We've had it's gone down really, really well. We're very, in that sense, we've achieved something. So on the 19th, I was in New York. I was part of the science. I ran a whole day as part of the science summit that was supported by the information organization. They call it GSI, and the science summit and the advisory board, the Amandeep Gill's department. We ran a whole panel there on the day. A lot of media there. We had panels, people from all over the world. That's the representative from Tokyo in the middle, and Daisy McGregor from the UK government, and the guy nearest us is Gary Marcus, talking about what was in the report. And for them, I mean, they, of course, the people on the panels on our body knew what was in the report. These people hadn't seen the report till it came out that night, so they were we prepped them a bit in what was in it, but and the government people had, of course, seen it through the government channels, but it was quite hard for others. I sent Gary Marcus a copy 2 days before the panel, said, don't tell anybody, this is embargoed. But that was on the day in New York. And then there was a lot of, this was my talking card. I put this on all the social media. They did one of these for each of us. So we could use our social media channels to get it out. And this is what, now these windows are in the way. I can't see that slide very well. So, you know, we said in the report, we're addressing AI governance gaps, you know, we made the point that out of 193 member states, only 7 are party to the 7 recent prominent AI governance initiatives, i.e. party to all of them, right? So, and 118 countries are missing entirely from any of those. The digital quilt, did you call it a digital quilt, George? Anyway, the quilt that you talked about of all these different, they're just a small number of countries, which almost all exclude China. So if you read our book, Geopolitics of the Internet, you know, that actually they're missing India's missing from most of them, as is China. Those are the 2 biggest countries in the world, let alone all the small countries, the big countries that are still developing, all missing from this discussion. And so our report, that was a very big thing for us to tackle, is how can we, what we don't want is to end up where we are with climate change, where we in the West, and to some extent, no, we in the West have had it really good with cheap energy. We've able to make a lot of money out of that. And now we're saying to the rest of the world, boy, you can't do that. You've got to cut back like we are. And you know, it just doesn't seem fair. And we've got to make sure we don't repeat that mistake with AI. It's just, yeah, for the good of humanity is what this is all about. So we identified the gaps and tried to come up with ways in which we could help the whole world. So, sorry, get that on there. Oh, now where's it gone? I don't know. Oh, there we are. Right, sorry, maybe. So these were the key recommendations. It's a 95-page report. I'm not going to this is it. This is the page you get on what was in there. There were 7 recommendations. They're numbered here 1 to 7. The first part is about common understanding. So the idea is to establish a scientific panel it's similar to what we have for climate change, that will look at the state of the science once or twice a year. The UK science report will feed into that. This is the plan. They did one, AI safety was the one the UK produced with a large scientific panel last year, and they're doing the same for the February summit in this year they did it, and they'll do the same for the February summit in Paris. So these things will feed into each other. It's not like we're trying to replace what's already happening. We're trying to build on it. And then the common ground is a big thing, is producing a global policy dialogue. So it's very important to differentiate between governance and regulation. Regulation will happen in nation states, and it will be different depending on the clearly different countries, to have different cultures, different economic drivers. There may be groupings, but this piece is about a governance that you can talk about principles that people will abide by, overriding principles to take account of in their regulation. Talk about, as that we mentioned, we recommend a much more on standards exchange than we currently have. There are numerous standards bodies there are hundreds of standards emerging for AI, and they need to be harmonized. So that's what we're talking about here. Then there's a big piece on global capacity building for the Global South. This is effectively a big recommendation to help people in the Global South and i.e. the developing world. That includes, of course, India and to some extent China, but it's a bit of a different case, to boost their capacities, offer training, compute resources, data sets for researchers and their entrepreneurs. And that's tied with the concept of a global AI fund to support that and to empower local efforts to further the SDGs, which is the Secretary General's main aim. Now, I think of that as developing a CERN for AI. That would be a virtual, not a physical CERN like in Geneva with the, you know, all the high energy physics, but a virtual a virtual lab, or whatever you want to call it, that enables countries to access compute power, and it could be supported in cash or in kind by governments or big companies, to enable developing countries to access compute power, help them build data sets and do training. I think everybody could get something out of that. So that's, but there, we did have an idea of a number, but they suggested we took that out, and that's probably one of the most contentious things we talked about. We also talked about a data framework to standardize data related definitions, principles to help sharing and accountability for AI systems. And that was the one thing that didn't go through in the Digital Compact. And then the other contentious thing we talked about was that the UN should have a small AI office to coordinate and hold the UN to the fire and help the UN actually take forward these recommendations. That would come under Amandeep Gill's office. There's a little bit of resistance to that because there's already agencies in the UN that would like to do this. For example, the ITU would say, well, we can do this. So that's internal UN considerations, really. I think it'll probably happen, but we don't know. This was us. So this was most of us, not all of us, most of us, the people we captured at tea time in Singapore. So this is the beginning. Our work has finished here. This is the beginning of the conversation. We had a party to celebrate on the Saturday night in New York. That's James Monica and Carme Antigues, and that's again Yizhen from. He gets into every photo, I think. This dinner was very well sponsored, so we had a lot of good food, and it was sponsored by the whiskey company. No, the Spanish brandy company. Anyway, it was amazing. There was a lot of Spanish brandy. It was really wonderful Spanish brandy. I can't remember the name of the company, but anyway, we were celebrating. That's Amandeep Gill there talking at the end of the evening. Now, while I put those parties in because they're fun, we bonded, but actually this is my last slide I'm coming up to. While we were here partying, the Secretariat of the Digital Compact team were taking our report and putting it into the Digital Compact for the document that went to the General Assembly the next day. They do a lot of this at the UN. They work overnight. That's Amandeep Gill and the people there who were in charge of putting the Digital Compact to the General Assembly. They worked tirelessly both on the diplomacy for it, because this had to be voted on by the General Assembly, and right up to the end, there were a couple of countries that didn't want to vote on it. And all of our recommendations went through as Section 5 of the Digital Compact, except for the data sharing. They couldn't win that. There was a lot of resistance to talking about data exchange because there's a concept that you make money out of data, I suppose. Anyway, but all the other 6 recommendations went through, and it was voted on unanimously. And that, my friends, is that.
Thank you, Wendy. A special thanks for providing us with insight on the behind-the-scenes workings to make possible for such a report to go out at all. And that is important to understand, and one cannot understand that by reading it. Let's jump into questions. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't got any questions, George.
Let me give them time to think. I have 2. I will ask the first one. How shall I put it? Agreement on general principles is not the most difficult part, for nations to do. You're aware, I'm sure, that earlier this year, the United States proposed the United Nations resolution on responsible and ethical AI and so on. And China, 2 months later, proposed another one, calling for collaboration, global collaboration, and spreading the benefits. Both were adopted unanimously by all UN members. It seems that the trouble comes when things begin to use an expression used in the report, when things begin to acquire muscle and teeth.
Yeah.
So that's my question. What do you see any prospect for muscle and teeth?
I totally agree with you, and many people think, well, great report, but it's the UN, nothing's going to happen. And so I don't, at the moment, I know no more than you about, well, maybe I have a bit of inside knowledge, but I don't actually know anything about what's going to happen next. They've gone back into a huddle to decide how to take it forward. My best guess is that the first thing, because I've heard this come back to me from the UK government, so that obviously they're talking to the big players. There's there are already plans for the next summit. The one that started, that I'm talking there about, the one that started with the Bletchley Park AI Safety Summit that the UK ran. Then there was one in Korea. It was much smaller, but the French are planning a big summit. It's not called Safety Summit anymore. It's called, I think, S goes for social. They're making it much broader, and they're including anybody that wants to attend in terms of countries represented, whereas the UK only, I don't know, it was only 30 or 40 countries that actually attended the first AI Safety Summit. I don't know how many went to Korea. And so I'm talking about those summits. That will happen, but I don't believe there's a plan for those to go on forever. I think these are going to dovetail. So I think and as I said, the UK has started. It has set up its expert panel to produce its next iteration of the AI safety report. I think the UN, the first thing it will launch is the scientific panel. I think so. And to produce, and I don't know it will produce a report for the Paris summit. I think that's too soon, but I think it will probably pick up from there and produce its first report, maybe, this is just guessing, this time next year sort of thing. That's the sort of timescale I think it could be done in. I think you'll see that happen first. That would then be cause for a conference, and it could be around the, gosh, I could manage this process if they asked me. It could be around the AI for Good Summit, which is usually in the summer, or they could have a second sort of conference to talk about the scientific report, a bit like the climate science people do, and start the global policy dialogue there and the standards exchange dialogue. Meanwhile, I imagine, if I was Amandeep, I would then be talking to industry and government about raising a global fund to do the capacity building. That's how I would do it. That doesn't mean it's how it's going to happen. But I do think the big thing Amandeep's got to win is some resource to run, keep the secretariat going, basically. The secretariat that helped with the H-Lab report, he needs a small office to actually make things happen, working with the big governments that can make things happen. I mean, if any of you know Amandeep Gill, he lives on an aeroplane, basically. He's all around the world. He talks to every government. He's particularly well connected in India, China, and the US and Europe. And anyway, if anyone can make it happen, he can. That's how I think it will play out. But it's a big guess. So we could play this video back this time next year and see how right or wrong I was.
Yes, as your colleague on the board, Alondra Nelson, said, the devil will be in the implementation, as it always is.
Of course.
Hannes has asked for the floor.
Thanks, Wendy, for the presentation. And George already asked the first hot topic, which is, let's say, self-government or recommendation versus, let's say, enforcement by law. The second hot issue is, I think,
Well,
which
he
we have
didn't really ask that, Hans. He didn't.
a little bit. He went into this
Well,
direction.
because you see, as I said, we have to, the UN is not going to do legal enforcement.
Yeah.
It's not going to do that. There could be things down the line, and we talk about this in the report. A bit like we put this out of scope, but that we did look a lot at nuclear disarmament type and nuclear treaties. There could be down the line, and this is 5-10 years down the line, probably, treaties that people could sign that say AI should not be used for this. And there are already discussions about AI in weapons and military use in military. We did not address that.
Okay.
That's another.
And so we really thought that was, because that's already happening, we thought that was out of scope. But otherwise, in terms of legal frameworks, that will happen, and the principles will be, you know, we would, your legal framework should conform to this principle. It won't be that the UN will pass laws, make mandatory laws. It can't.
Okay, but let Hannes finish his question.
No,
Okay.
this was
I just wanted to get the language right.
Thanks for the clarification. But this, I think, is one of the first hot topic. The second one is this global scale, which you really manage in the United Nations, which is, let's say, this multipolar world we are living at the moment. And I think, how can we approach this also with respect to the notion of democracy? Because we are arguing for democratic values and things like that. And on the other side, we have to somehow govern AI on a global scale, where we might need to somehow not bring through all our democratic values. I think this is at the core of this global discussion.
Yeah, and it's quite a philosophical discussion in many ways.
It's also a very political discussion.
Well, but as we say in our book, sorry, I keep referring back to that. We discuss this a lot in the book with the internet and geopolitics, and you know, the more democratic countries make up what, a third of the internet, something like that.
Maybe
depends. I mean, obviously, some countries you claim to be democratic and aren't, and other countries. I mean, take, you know, Singapore, for example, which is not democratic, but it does very well for its citizens. So you know, the balance is already against democracies in a way. This is just facts, right? I'm not. So we would argue for democratic values, but there are. I mean, when I look at what's happening with AI, I always say this with a caveat, but if you don't mind about freedom of speech, if that's not something you worry about, China's a very safe place to be in terms of the internet and AI, because they are passing laws that they are because they can do things, because of the way they manage their system, they can control things better than we've let it all hang out. I was talking to Alan Kay about this only yesterday afternoon, the famous, you know, the great Alan Kay.
Yes.
He pointed me to the whole Earth catalogue, which I hadn't really looked at before, which was sort of pre-TED and pre-web, and it's amazing. Anyway, it was just an amazing afternoon with him. And as he said,
our early dreams, no?
Yeah. We've got, you know, our approach to the internet and to AI largely, but AI has to be different because it's product, not just an ecosystem of interconnected information. Is, you know, we let it all hang out, and, you know, to the winner the riches, and the let that happen, and let innovation happen, right? And we are paying the price for that in many different ways, particularly in the way what's happening to our young people, and also in what's happening to our internet. It's becoming a toxic swamp. There's an awful lot of misinformation, factually wrong information on the internet, which is being generated by generative AI. We're creating a toxic swamp. Now, that isn't happening in China, and I don't want to go live in China. I don't want to be in that author. And because China's basically said on the internet, they said, you know, we can look at anything. So if we don't like what you're saying, we can stop you saying it. They also passed a rule that said a law which said if you lie on the internet, you can go to jail, and that killed Twitter in China. They might have killed it anyway, but they killed Twitter in China overnight because nobody was going to retweet anything. I'm not, it's just the way they've handled it, and now they're passing a lot of them. I believe that the rules they're making for the AI companies to be safe are much tougher than we're imposing on our companies. We, of course, in Europe, we have no control really, but much tougher than at the moment. They're allowing self-regulation in America. That will probably change, but companies can produce whatever, can give us whatever software they want. It can come out overnight without it being properly tested or evaluated, and it's a free-for-all. Well, it isn't, because it costs us actually a lot of money to get access to this stuff, and it costs them a lot of money to produce it and a lot of resource. But and I'm not defending China here, because China does that. China does that with AI because it basically says we decide what the truth is. And as long as you telling our truth, you're fine. You can do what you like. We would never accept that. But we have to accept the flaws in our speech, which says anything goes. And we've had the irony in the UK with the new government coming in. We had our riots in the summer, and some people who put one single Facebook message out that was really horrible have gone to jail for a long time. The tide is turning a bit. Meanwhile, we're letting prisoners out because we haven't got any space in our jails. I don't quite understand that, but anyway, I should stop there, I know. But this is a very deep, complicated question.
That's another issue, a very important one, but it's a different issue. I have two questions from the chat. One comes from Tehran, and the question is, how about involving countries that are geopolitically apart, like Iran, in what the report calls universal and networked collaboration? That's the first question. And the second question is, you said that each nation, each member state will have its own regulatory regime. But then again, isn't that going to pose problems on the global scale? That's two questions.
Well, I don't think it's any different to what we're doing with climate change. I mean, each government has its own controls on climate change. What the principles of climate change say is we've got a target, and countries are asked to meet that target as best they can. But every country has its own laws on what fuel can be used, how, who can use what amount of fuel, the regulation happens at the nation state level. Because that's where the economies are. It may be you'll get collectives over time, but I don't see that the UN doesn't do that. It's about it's about creating global principles, I think, very much. What we don't want to do, I'll come back to the Iran thing, although I don't have a good answer for Iran. But what we don't want to do is wait too long for the dialogue to happen and then have some disaster that's caused by AI and leave it too late. We don't want whether it's I don't know, it could be, you can think of the sorts of things AI might cause, that if it gets out of hand, used by the wrong people, we need. So whilst I think the UK AI Safety Institute and the other state, there are only like 7 real safety institutes, I think, forming. There's US, UK, Singapore, maybe Canada, maybe France. There's a small number, but I do think the work they're doing, whilst I think it should actually be done by the companies, I think the companies should do the safety testing and the government should audit and regulate. But I do think having expertise in how to make AI safe for the future and keeping an eye on where it's going and how the science is developing it will become an important topic in our area, very much so. but that needs to work for the whole world and not just the countries that have safety institutes. So that's what we're talking about. Now, in terms of Iran, I don't have a good answer because it was, I mean, as I said, we only had 39 countries represented on our board, right? So not every country was represented by any means. We did have someone from Russia. We didn't have anyone from Iran. We didn't have anyone from North Korea. There were 160 countries that weren't represented on our advisory board. So I would hope that this works, what we're talking about works for every country in the world. And I'm assuming Iran's a member of the General Assembly, so Iran must have voted for what went through. I'm assuming. That doesn't mean, as you said, George Ohana said, having a vote in the General Assembly doesn't actually mean anything. It just says you can do this if you've got the resource or whatever to do it. But I assume Iran is a member of the General Assembly. Yes, it is.
Yes,
of course, and it did vote for all resolutions, including the United States one and the Chinese one, on principles. Okay. Any other questions? Just one remark. I mean, the report argues that the 118 countries have not been involved in the preparation of the various, guidelines or regulatory frameworks, and they should. And of course, nobody could disagree with that. But we do have examples of, let's say, regulation that, although it was not prepared by all countries that are member states of the United Nations, at the end, it was adopted by the vast majority of them, like the protection of personal data, the GDPR I'm referring to. This has been adopted by the majority of the member states of the United Nations, although it was
No, it hasn't, George. No, it has not. I disagree with you on that one.
You're welcome to disagree.
Only adopted if they're going to trade with Europe. When they're trading with Europe, they have to work with it, right? It doesn't mean they use it all the time. It doesn't mean there's adopted law in their country. You're wrong there.
It was adapted and adopted.
All right. Yes, adapted and adopted. And GDPR does have its faults. It's not perfect by any means.
I'm not arguing in favor of any regulation.
But I don't think you could claim that GDPR is a universal.
I did claim that. I just claim that having everybody participating is not necessarily a prerequisite for something to be adopted broadly. So
perhaps we'll agree to differ on GDPR and the EU AI Act in terms of its influence. Oh, listen, it does have an influence, yes. But one of the influences is that companies are not going to trade with the EU because of the act. So
maybe. Okay.
Example.
Any other questions or remarks? I'm checking the chat. No, the Tehran response is thanking you for your answer. And
I'm not looking at the chat. Sorry.
A wish. So I think we've come to the time to thank our speaker for this talk and to proceed with a piece of music. Wendy, perhaps you can say just 2 words about why you chose that piece of music.
Well, just because it's one of my faves from the 80s, 90s. I forget now. 80s, 90s, but also it's the lyrics. I just think the lyrics are perfect for this topic, and I didn't want to go classical.
I'll take over. Thanks, Wendy, for choosing this track. So Wendy chose "Tears for Fears." Everybody wants to rule the world. Great song. Great lyrics. I think George might also post them in the chat afterward, or like while the song is playing. But anyway, I think it's a really good choice. I hope my connection remains stable while I play this. I mean, it's a bit risky, as we've seen when I shared the screen before. But before we dare to do this, I just want to announce the next lecture. We don't have a final date yet. We're currently finalizing the dates for the next lectures in November. But it will most likely be given by Professor Rostam Neuwirth from the University of Macau. And he will speak on AI regulation in China. So actually, continuing part of the conversation we had today, and that will be a very interesting topic. For the final date and to get all this information, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter, or follow us on X, or watch the website closely to get all the updates. So that's all I can say for the moment. Thanks to Wendy again, and thanks to George for moderating this, and to everybody. See you next time. And now everybody wants to rule the world.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Lovely song. Well, thanks for playing it. Lovely.
Good choice. Okay.
Take care, Wendy. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Be in touch, Hannes. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye.